Good evening and welcome to Nurturing Our Roots with your host, Dr. Antoinette Harrell. I am so happy tonight for my special guest joining me. I would like to welcome Bernice Alexander Bennett, the author of The Black Homesteaders of the South, as we celebrate and commemorate and reflect on this month and next month, like I tell everybody today. Next month, I'm Black as well. So we're going to keep celebrating our history and just reflecting upon the many accomplishments that our ancestors have made throughout the history of America. So, without any due process, let me just bring on my special guest, Bernice, and have her talk about what she's doing and what she has done, and will be doing. Hi, Bernice. How are you?
Hello, Dr. Antoinette Harrell, and thank you so much for having us on your show tonight to talk about the state of Mississippi and the Mississippi Black homesteaders. Let's move forward with the slide.
And Bernice, I'm so happy that you have contributors who have wrote about their ancestors, and I just want to hear from them. I'm hoping that I just don't get too involved in a story because I know each one of them have a very fascinating journey and experience to tell us as they talk about their ancestors tonight. Thank you,
Yes,
Bernice.
and I am so excited because as you can see all of the faces of the contributors. And with that, we are talking about the state of Mississippi, where the second largest number of Black homesteader stories will be presented to you tonight. We have 15 stories from Mississippi.
Oh, really? That's a
Yes.
large number, and I know you're pushing for more.
We're absolutely pushing for more. And these descendants have done such an outstanding job just finding their ancestors and then writing the story, just as your introductory video showed. Tell your stories. And so that's one of the things that I think we done in the Black Homesteaders of the South book. And we will continue to tell those stories. So let's move on. Well, the Black homesteaders of the South tell stories of resilience and celebrate individuals, some of whom were formerly enslaved, but were able, after their emancipation, to obtain up to 160 acres of public land under the Homestead Act of 1862. Now, can you just imagine hearing that amount of land? And we're talking about Black homesteaders obtaining up to 160 acres of land. So let's move on. So when we look at the state of Mississippi, in total, there were 24,126 homesteads were proved up in Mississippi. And when you hear the word proved up, that means that these individuals met the guidelines, lived on the land, cultivated the land, and were able to obtain a land patent. The total acreage of homesteaded land was over 2,600,000, which is 9% of the land in the state of Mississippi. And so, yes, we have some of that land to talk about. So let's keep moving on. So when we talk about the Mississippi Black homesteaders, these are the areas of which we will be discussing. Amite, Woodville, Choctaw, Lauderdale, Franklin, Pike, and Simpson. And there may be more. Okay, so let's keep on. So what the Land Act is, and I think I mentioned the Homestead Act of 1862. Well, this act went into effect January 1st, 1863. Now, the original act was signed by Abraham Lincoln. And you know, back in 1862, a large number of African Americans were still enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, many of us at that particular time did not qualify as citizens to obtain this land. But let me just go over some of the guidelines with you. Individuals that would apply for this land had to be over the age of 21. never take up arms against the United States. Single women, widows, single men, immigrants, and later former slaves could apply for this land. Now, they had to settle on the land, and this is what I call the land acquisition process. They had to settle on the land. They had to file an application and pay a small filing fee. Then they had to cultivate, improve, and live on the land for a minimum of 5 years. Some lived much longer before they qualified. They had to bring witnesses and then post their intentions in the newspaper and then file for a deed of title or patent and pay another small filing fee.
Which was really a huge filing fee for them.
For them, especially
Mhm.
when you may see $14. I mean,
Yes.
can you imagine $14 as a filing fee? But some kind of way, they made a way and they did it. And they found that money to apply for that land. Okay, so let's move on. Now, this is a poster that the National Homestead Historical Park put out to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the Homestead Act. And what you see in this poster is free land, millions of acres. Now, I want you all to understand when they talked about free land, we're talking about moving west, okay? The free land was there, but you also see the word American dream. And then in the middle of this poster, you see an African American family. So, what does the American dream mean? I mean, Antoinette, I guess we all talk about, well, what's the American dream, right?
To own
Education,
land.
right to vote, work for wages. People are not working free.
Mm-hmm.
Religious freedom, safety, and land. Land and home ownership. That's the dream. That's what we wanted to see. And that's what we hope for. So
Mm-hmm.
let's move on. But many African Americans after the Civil War, some had already signed labor contracts. And
Mm-hmm.
really, because they signed labor contracts under the Freedmen Bureau, they didn't turn around and apply for this land. Some after the Freedmen Bureau went into a sharecropping system.
Mm-hmm.
And but we want to move beyond that because that's not our single story that
Mm-hmm.
we became sharecroppers. We also became landowners.
Landowners. Exactly.
That's right. So the book itself came from a project called the Black Homesteaders Project. And this project is part of the Homestead National Historical Park, which is located in Nebraska. Move on to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
The goal of this particular project was to get people to write and share their stories, which is what we have been all about, telling our stories, finding descendants to tell those stories. So let's move further. But I want you all to understand in order for us to tell that story, we
Mm-hmm.
have to find documentation, we have to find proof. And in order for our folks to even have gotten that land, they had to have a little money. You know, you mentioned, oh, wow, paying a small filing fee. Well, they had to have some money, a little money, a penny jar, but some money because they needed farm tools and they needed seeds and livestock. And they also needed transportation because, look, many of them were leaving the rural area, going
Mm-hmm.
to an urban area to file at a land office. They also needed other resources. And one of those key resources was skills, skills in agriculture. Can you imagine individuals applying for this land with no agriculture skills? Well, they didn't make it very long because they had no farming, no knowledge of farming. Whereas I would say that the majority of the individuals that did obtain that land had those skills because they did it during enslavement. They also needed community support, witnesses, individuals that would testify in support of their application. So let's move on. The goal that everyone wanted was to achieve a land patent, to get a land patent in which they're transferring land from the United States government to an individual. That's what it's all about. So let's go to the next level. And this is what a land patent looks like. But if you found something that looks like this, I want everybody to understand this is the end of the process. I mean, it's happy dance time, of course, but it's still the end of the process. And so, what we need to do is understand that we need to take people to the beginning of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And so, let's see what's on the next slide here. The beginning of
Mm-hmm.
the process means that there are records. Did any of you even know that records exist at the National Archives? You see those boxes? Each of those boxes consists of, let's say, maybe 50 land entry case files. Those files tell the story.
Are
They
they in alphabetical order in the box?
Nope, they're in the box based on when they were given, which
Okay.
means there is a number. You
Okay.
have to go in. I wish it was as
Yeah.
easy as alphabetical, but you do have to order a file based on the land office where the file was entered. And with that, you also have a patent number, and that's how you find your application.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the good stuff starts. This is the place where we find more information. So let's talk about what's in those files. Okay, so you're going to find the settler's name. You're going to find a person saying where they were born, how old they were, when they settled on the land and where the land is located, and how much was the filing fee and when. But let's keep on because there's more. You're going to read about the improvements that they documented in the file and how many individuals lived with him or her on the homestead, in addition to finding out if they signed their name or if they used an X. Then you're going to find the names of the witnesses. Then you'll find out exactly when the land patent was acquired and then how many acres. So that's what's in the land entry case files. And with that information and other research that these researchers have done, then you'll be able to see a story come to life. And so I'm going to stop talking now because I'm looking forward to the first story. Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you, Bernie. Thank you so much. And I just want to commend you and thank you so much for your dedication. And I know it all started with your ancestor, Peter Clark. And thank you for using your ancestors as the way to pave the way for others. Thank you, including myself.
Thank you. Okay.
I think let me make sure. Norm. All right. How are you, Norma?
I am great, and thank you for inviting us to share our story of our ancestors.
You are so welcome, yours, and thank you for sharing with us as well.
Well, I wanted to share about James Riley, who was my great great uncle. And I want to tell you how I got interested in looking for the information about him. And it
And
all
how did that
started,
come about? Tell us, how did that come
well,
about?
it started with this lady here. I don't know if you could see her.
No, we can't see.
Ah,
Uh-huh, a little bit.
a
Uh-huh.
little bit. Let me see which way I go.
All right, you're
Yeah,
getting better. Yes,
yeah.
yes, with that lady. And who would that lady be to you?
That lady is my first cousin, and she is the granddaughter of James Riley, who I told the story about on this land grant. I met her in the early 90s, And we always would sit down and talk about her family. And I just got so interested in it. And cousin Henrietta talked about her grandfather in the land. I'm saying, okay, who is this? And so when she hit around about 95, I decided to do some research and give her a surprise and share about her grandfather, James Riley. And that's when I started digging. And that was the most amazing thing for her. She said, really? Really? We had land? I said, yes, cousin Henrietta. And so I shared what he went through the process of getting that land, how he staked out his claim and cultivated that land, and how he built on that land. But the question was for her is, where's the land now? And that was many questions I had in terms of digging and answering that information. He built a log cabin. He had 4 children who helped him. He had witnesses to support him in terms of documenting that he cultivated the land. And I went through the names of the people who supported him in getting that land. And just, you should see her face, the amazement on her face in terms of, this is my grandfather? And that was inspired me to tell the story about James Riley. I could have told the story about my second great-grandfather, who was also a homesteader. His name was Van Riley, who happens to be James Riley's half-brother. And she said, well, how come you hadn't looked up anything about your great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather? And I said, because I wanted to tell your story. So that's how I got involved in doing the Homesteaders research in terms of my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and her grandfather.
What county did you research in Mississippi?
The county is Amite County, but
Same place where Denise is from, and I'm my ancestors too.
his land was a little bit outside of Amite County, but kind of within it. It was called Dayton, Mississippi at that time, and I was able to do some research on that. Dayton was the name of the town when James Riley received his homestead. It changed from the name of Dayton to Stevenson. And Stevenson was based on, it was a logging town. Whoever owned the logging town, the town was named after. And the last was Crosby, Mississippi, which is what it's known as now. So James Riley originally got his grant in 1891 when it was known as Dayton, Mississippi.
How much time did you spend throughout the years researching? Did it take a long time for you?
It took about a year because I live in Virginia and I had to keep going home and going through the courthouse looking for information. And digging into the courthouse records, land records, being that they did not take care of records very well. So it was a tedious process. It was about a year.
About a year. Yeah. Some people take longer. And your cousin, she was so happy and pleased with your research.
Cousin Henrietta lived to be 96 years old. And she was the most happiest person in terms of having a gift given to her for her birthday. I made sure that I finished on her birthday, and she shared that with her family.
Oh, what a beautiful story. And Norma, we thank you for just sharing that beautiful story with us and inspiring other people to research their family history. And thank you for the commemoration this month because it's inspiring. And I know others that's watching, I'm reading some of the comments. This is very interesting. So thank you so much for sharing your ancestor story with us as well.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to Denise. Going to bring her on. Hi, Denise. How are you? How are you? I think. All right. Trying to unmute you. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. Well,
Yes.
first of
How are
all,
you?
I'm doing great. First of all, I well, thank you for bringing us on, but I really want to thank Bernice for putting up with me over the years when I needed information, and she would go and get it for me. And my mother wasn't real happy to share her memories of Mississippi, so I really had to do a lot of digging. But it all started, say, about 30 some years ago when I visited Mississippi. I'm sure you can see it here.
Mm-hmm.
And this man's name is Peter Hunt. And his picture was on the wall. And I asked my great grandmother, I said, why do you got that white guy's picture on the wall? Who is he? And she said, that's no white guy. That's great Uncle Peter. And he was a slave. So, needless to say, my little mind was blown. And I asked her so many questions. And she says, well, all I know is this and all I know is that. And he was in a great war. But no one else in the family knew anything about him, not my mother, nor her siblings, or anything. So I told my great aunt, I said, I'm going to find out and I'm going to let you know anything I found out. So that was over maybe a 10-year span. Every time I would find something, I would call her and let her know. Or I would send her, way back in the day, phone cards so we could talk about it. But when she died, I was going to call her that night and tell her something, but she was sick. And so in the middle of the night, we got that phone call. And I told my mom, we have to go to her funeral. I just really feel like we have to go. So we went, and her son told me, Mama left you something. I was like,
Wow.
really? What? And it was the picture. She was so excited to know some information about him. And I had found out Peter's mother's name and his sister's. I mean, with a lot of help, genealogists I didn't even know, and just people I met online. So after I met Bernice, I met her in DC, and she met me at the archives, and she told me how to go about it. And I had like an hour to find some things, but she told me exactly what page to go to. And so I have a twin sister. So she was there, and I was saying, look up that page, and I'll go over here and look up this page. And I wrote the book about Peter. And then I revised it, and then I called Bernice, and I said, I'm having a problem. I know Peter owned land, but if he paid for it, how would he pay money for 150 some acres? She said it had to be a homestead. Sure enough, she told me where to check. I checked. He homesteaded it. And then I said, well, wait a minute. His mother's name was America. I've only seen one name. It was in Franklin County, Mississippi. And she said, well, didn't I send that to you? I said, well, I don't think so. They misspelled her name. Instead of Harold, like yours,
Uh-huh.
it was pronounced Harold. So they spelled it Harold, like a man's name. Sure enough, it was her. So I tell you, that was just the greatest feeling of my entire life. So in the last year or so, I've probably looked up 10 homesteads, and they're all interrelated, either by marriage or by blood. I have found cousins we didn't even know anything about. And one man told me, he said, Denise, he says, I feel like such a complete man now. I feel like a whole man, and I can share it with my children, because his mother wouldn't talk about her time in Mississippi. And he
Mm-hmm.
knew it had something to do with land. And so it turns out that she left Mississippi and she went and married a Native American because she didn't want to have nothing to do with black or white or anything else. So the stories that you find, I mean, once you find out the successes of your ancestors in
Mm-hmm.
such a hard, demeaning, and horrible time, that they persevered, they hung in there, they did what they had to do.
Exactly.
America is my third great grandmother, that far back. She went from being born into slavery, having children by the slave owner, once freed, once her son became a homesteader, then she became a homesteader. But the point of it is, that caused me to go back and look at some of those genealogy records, some of those census records. Did they own the land? Did they rent it? I saw where he mortgaged his property. And I thought, why would he mortgage it? Well, it was just before his mother homesteaded. And when she finally filed for her homestead 9 years later, she had like 5 cows, she had 2 horses, and all the things in a log cabin they built. So I was thinking more than likely he mortgaged his property in order for his mother to get her property. And by the time she received it, she was 72 years old.
Wow.
And I'm sort of kind of that age.
Yes.
And it just, I just started crying once
Yes. I can understand that.
yeah, that what she completed, and how many of us are finding out that we're related. Norm and I are, we know we have to be related because our families were in the same areas, the same names, everything. So we're working on that too. So for me, the biggest thing is to unite families. Tell your children, your nieces, your nephews, cousins, anybody about your family to spur them on to say, I need to buy land too. I need to own a home too. I need to know that I'm succeeding because that's just in me because of my ancestors. My sister and I, we talk a lot and we say, you know, there's something in us that just makes us do certain things.
And now you know.
Now I know why. And I want to know even more about the beginning of my great-great-grandmother. I know all the way to when she died, my 3rd great-grandmother. But I want to know, where did she come from? How did she develop the cunning and the skills that she had in order to survive?
And so, Denise, we thank you, Nurturing Our Roots. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. And just listening to each one of you is so inspiring. And to know that, you know, you're paying homage to your ancestors, you know something about yourself, you can now tell others. So I thank you so much. And it's just so strange. Well, it's not strange that we all are researching somewhat in the same places.
Right.
Yes. Well, thank you once again for sharing your story. And I look forward to where I can hear each one of you for a little longer period of time because you have such great stories. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. All right. We are going to bring on another guest. I think that would be Johnny. Let me see where Johnny. Okay. Hi, Johnny. How are you? Okay. All right. Hi, Johnny. How are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And thank you. And welcome to Nurturing Our Roots. And we want to hear your story. First of all, where's your family from? What area you was researching?
Lauderdale County, Mississippi.
Okay.
Right across the Alabama line.
Wonderful. Right. So tell us a little bit, you know, I'm trying to give everybody 8 minutes just to tell us a little bit about your family history.
Okay, well, if you don't mind, I'm going to read a little bit because I'm going to tell you about 2 homesteaders. And so I got a lot of information to cover and I don't want to forget.
Okay? All right. Wonderful.
The first person that, and really I'm so honored to tell these stories about 2 of my ancestors who were Black homesteaders in Mississippi. And the first one is my paternal great-grandfather. His name is Jacob Ramsey. And by the time I became fascinated with family history, it was too late for any living person to give me a firsthand account of the lives of my paternal great-grandparents, Jacob and Leanna Ramsey. However, my father was able to share some oral history about his grandfather, Jacob, including the fact that Jacob owned land in Tomb Suba, Lauderdale County, Mississippi, about 12 miles east of Meridian. The old place, quote unquote, was the term of endearment given to the land where Jacob and Leanna resided, and that location remained the anchor of the family, even after the home burned to the ground and long after Jacob and Leanna had passed on. One of my father's earliest recollections was his 5th birthday celebration on the old place in 1920. Lots of family lived nearby to celebrate with Daddy, and there was plenty of food, in particular freshly fried chicken and home-baked pies and cakes. And Daddy fondly remembered his early years on the family land, and that inspired me to learn more. So when researching the land in the late 1990s, I discovered that a land patent had been issued to Jacob Ramsey on October 1, 1901, and I requested the case files from the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And Jacob, like most African Americans after the Civil War, knew that property ownership was the key to independence, financial stability, control over their own lives, and respect. So in 1884, Jacob applied at the Jackson, Mississippi Land Office and wanted to acquire 80.02 acres. The homestead proof testimony of claimant that was finally filed on July 31, 1900, he states that he was born in North Carolina and that he lost his duplicate receipt. He states that in 1884, which is when he had applied, he built a frame house and a corn stable, and 40 acres were improved to a value of $200. He had not been absent from the land at all, and he lived with his wife and 5 grandchildren. And on August 4th of 1900, Jacob paid his fee to satisfy the land agent fee. And I discovered the 1900 census does match up with everything that he had, put in his paperwork at that time. On August 4th, James Hill, the registrar, provided Jacob with a final certificate and states that on presentation of the certificate to the commissioner of the General Land Office, the said Jacob Ramsey shall be entitled to a patent on the tract of the land above described. But Jacob failed to present that certificate to the commissioner as directed. And on March 20th, 1901, which is about 7 months later, Jacob received an official notification that he had failed to make final proof. So he hurriedly presented a sworn affidavit on March 23rd, which is like 3 days later, stating that, quote, he failed to make his final proof, for which he received final certificate number 15305 through ignorance of the law, requiring him to make final proof within the statutory period, that he is an unlettered man, unable to read and write, and he failed to inform himself of the duties required of him in reference to this claim. And he prays that the patent be granted to him upon filing of that affidavit. And one can only imagine how Jacob and Leanna were affected by this notification. The land represented their hopes and dreams for a better life. They lived on the land for 17 years, raising their children and grandchildren there. They were some of the founding members of Little Hope Baptist Missionary Church near their land in Tubsuba, and was regarded as leaders in the community. But Jacob's lack of ability to read and write appeared to play a role in his understanding and completing the land process. But on October 1, 1901, 17 years after Jacob's initial land claim, he was finally granted the land patent. So in spite of all these challenging experiences with the federal land patent process, Jacob and Leanna went on to acquire several other pieces of property through private land transactions. And one of the things that was very helpful for me in all that documentation that I received from the National Archives is that Jacob swore that he did not serve in the Army or the Navy in the War of the Rebellion, and he didn't take up arms against the United States, which is an eligibility requirement for, making the land claim. So I was kind of disappointed in that respect, because I just saw Jacob as, this fabulous person that's going to be fighting for his family in the war and everything. But nope, he did not fight in the Civil War. So there were no records there that I was hoping for. Based on Bible records, Jacob died on February 13th, 1909. After Leanna died on August 4th, 1915, all the land was divided among the 10 adult children. However, over the years, almost all of Jacob's land holdings have been sold or lost due to non-payment of taxes. As many of the family migrated north. This is disheartening, knowing how Jacob struggled for nearly 2 decades to meet the requirements for his final land patent. There is only about 1 acre that remains in the family, and it's located across the road from Little Hope Baptist Church. In fact, Jacob had gifted one of his acres to the church, and the church remains on that land to this day.
Wow. Could you please tell me how many acres did he try to patent from the beginning?
It was 80.02 acres.
Mm-hmm. And you still have 1 acre.
And there's 1 acre that a cousin is living on. And I see him often whenever I go to Mississippi, and he's right across the street from the church where Jacob and Leanna gave the acre to the church.
Are they buried there at that church?
No, at the time, everybody was being buried in another cemetery in Tumsuba, but I would say in the last 10 years, they started burying people that on the church property there.
Now, Tumsuma, is that what type of Indian name is that? Do you know?
I looked it up. I don't recall, but yes, it is an
It is
Indian
an Indian,
name.
yeah.
Yeah.
When you said that, I thought so, you know. So I want to ask you this question because I'm going to come back and show the photograph at the end. What does that make you feel? How do you feel just knowing that information, regardless to if you have the land in your family or not, that they really had a land patent? How did that make you feel? And just knowing that.
Well, it just made me feel very proud, coming out of slavery and he couldn't read and write, and to
Mhm.
accomplish that and wanting to have more for his family and struggling, to make it work because it wasn't working for him. He kept filing paperwork and it just never seemed to work. Within that 5-year period, he could have gotten ownership to the land, but it took him 17 years. And, there were some challenges there. And I'm sure some scary times that he thought he was
Of
going to give
course.
up the land, but he just kept at it. He wasn't going to give up. And that's why it's so disappointing that the next generation, didn't appreciate what he had gone through and didn't pay those taxes and lost the land.
Can
Yeah.
you
And don't forget,
imagine?
I have a second story too, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So,
You,
because I know I only have so much time, right?
yes, go
And
ahead.
that second story, that picture pertains to the second story, which is
Okay.
my grandfather, Willie Boss Ramsey, and he's my maternal grandfather and the youngest son of Jacob and Leanna. And he was born on the 25th of December in Lauderdale County, Mississippi. And according to Boss's only child, which is my father, his name is Alfred. William was called Boss because everyone in the community greatly respected him. Everyone, black or white, held Boss in very high esteem. And my father told me this one story about how he would hop trains in the 1930s to visit relatives around the country, and he was allowed to sit in the engine car while the hobos riding the rails rode in the boxcars because Daddy was afforded this special treatment because everyone knew he was Boss's boy. And he was a character. He was an entrepreneur. He constructed many of the homes in Tumsuba and some churches in the area. By Tumsuba standards, he was considered well-to-do, being one of the first residents to own an automobile. And Boss quickly filled a community need by establishing his own version of today's Uber, where he would give residents a ride into Meridian, the county seat of Lauderdale County. This ride service transformed a nearly all-day 12-mile trip on a treacherous dirt road by horse or oxen and buggy into a ride that was complete in less than an hour. And during the hot and summer summers, the ride service evolved into a necessity. Still another one of Boss's business ventures was that of a private money lender. My father, as a little boy, recalled how Boss would loan money to family and friends, and then he would collect weekly payments when he was in Meridian. And like his father, Jacob, Boss also homesteaded land in Tumsuba. But unlike Jacob, who had many difficulties and took additional years to finalize his land patent, Boss systematically accomplished all patent requirements in a very timely manner. So on January 2nd, 1903, his application was officially filed at the Jackson, Mississippi Land Office. Excuse me, he paid his fee. He signed this document with an X. And then on all the other land documents that he had completed 5 years later, he signed with his own signature. So it appears that in 5 years, Boss had learned to read and write. Among the many statements that he made on his homestead proof, he said he was just 27 years of age, living in Tumsuba, Mississippi, and was born in Mississippi. He lived with his wife and 2 children. He had a stepchild with him at the time, and that he raised crops for 5 seasons on about 15 acres. So he signed his final documents and everything and paid his fees, and his homestead was approved on April 30th, 1907, and he received his certificate in September of 1907. Boss suddenly died intestate on 25th of June, 1933. His wife, Delia, continued to live on the land until her death on the 24th of January, 1957. She also died intestate. My father managed the property during the 20 years after Mother Delia's death, renting it out to tenants and paying taxes. My mother and father had since migrated up to Detroit, in the late 1930s and then on to Los Angeles, where I grew up, during the Great Migration. But my father continued to take care of the land. And that boss had verbally stated on many occasions that he wanted my father, his son, to inherit his land. But in the late 1970s, Mother Dia's descendants from prior relationships attempted to settle the legal ownership. And they were trying to get my father out of the land by claiming he was illegitimate and therefore could not inherit from his father.
We have about 1 more minute.
Okay. It was eventually resolved and everything. And my father got his share. And I just want to say that we eventually bought back all of the land. So we got all of his 40 acres back together, and that it remains in the family today. I own it. And I also tell my kids about it and my grandkids. And one of the things I want to do in the future as a writing project will be to create a coffee table book to tell fascinating stories about Boss.
Wonderful.
I don't want to hand over electronic and paper files. I want to leave a legacy. And that's also how I wrote these stories for Bernice's book.
Oh, well, thank you. Such great stories. Thank you. Thank you.
So can you show that picture real quick of my grandfather?
It would have to be at the end because I have other people in the studio and I'll bring it back on.
Okay.
So just hold tight for me.
All right. Thank you.
All right. We're going to go into, let's bring on Nona. Hi, Nona. How are you? Nona is muted. All right. There you go. You're unmuted, Nona. How are you doing?
All right. Thank you for this opportunity.
You're quite welcome. What is your story?
Well, it really started off trying to find out about my family in general. I attended my first family reunion in 1989. Prior to the reunion, my mother told the story of her grandfather owning land. I was incredulous. How could a former enslaved man own any land? Well, when I went to the reunion, my other cousins verified the story. As a would-be neophyte genealogist, I looked at all of the wrong places to find information, census records. I was able to identify that they definitely lived in Pike County, but not verify that they owned the land. It was through going to genealogy conferences and seminars that I discovered the Bureau of Land Management patent. And I obtained the patent from my great-grandfather, Irvin Brumfield, in 2005. Through that patent, what was most interesting was the witnesses. He had two witnesses. One was Henry Connolly, the other one was Calvin Caston.
And why was those witnesses so important?
Well, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Calvin Caston turned out to be his stepfather.
Oh.
At that time, I did not know this. And it was through more years of research, I found out that Irvin Brumfield had a mother by the name of Liddy. And Liddy had two husbands. Her first husband is thought to be Louis Brumfield. Well, they were enslaved. She was born in 1825. We don't really know what happened to Louis, but she had 4 children. Then she married Calvin Caston. When Irvin Brumfield, the stepson, homesteaded the land, he was 24 years old, and Calvin Caston was one of his witnesses. Irvin was able, after 7 years, to get the final proof in the patent, and he obtained his patent on 1877. And I'd like to mention also that there are still some relatives living on this land.
That is amazing.
Now, during the course of my research, and this is why I would like to encourage everybody to do this type of research, because from that information, I was able to find other related family members. And now with the advent of DNA, you can find I call them genealogy cousins that I didn't know I had. And it was started with the land patent. He was able to cultivate 80 acres, and he had 10 children. Now, I think this is probably true to the times. He had sons, and he left land to the sons, not to the daughters.
The daughters. Mm-hmm.
And that is why some of the land is still in the family. But I like to continue on. This was like a seed. This land patent helped me connect to Liddy's 2 sets of children, who Liddy is my great-great-grandmother. And from this information and DNA is sprung another thing. During the COVID pandemic, my cousins developed a Zoom, and believe it or not, for 2.5 years, we have been meeting almost every week for Zoom, and we discuss genealogy.
That is amazing.
So I have the support of my cousins, and I have to mention their names: Althea, Carrie, Eddie, Larry, and Carletta. I've also been blogging about my family.
Yes.
And in the blog, I have identified other patents of related people. My blog is called Brumfield Genealogy and Other Branches and Trees. I'd like to really encourage everybody to really do this research. It was with this research that we found what we call the ancestral picture. And I don't know whether or not you'll be able to show it, but in the ancestral picture, this picture became available.
I will. I have that picture, and as soon as each person present, I want you and the guest that sent me the picture to come back on, to stay on while I pull that picture up, because that picture is so beautiful. I saw that picture.
The thing about the picture that was most interesting, one of our Caucasian cousins made that picture available.
Oh,
and it was
really?
We know that she's related through DNA, and she generously put that picture on Ancestry, and we saw the picture, and that's how we know what Liddy and Calvin Caston actually look like.
Oh, that's amazing.
And
That
so
is amazing.
So it's so exciting when you can associate a picture with a name, the story, the history. And I will defer my extra time to someone else so that they can continue on with their story.
If you wait 1 minute, I think I may be able to do it. Let's see. I think one of the pictures I do want to. Okay, this is the picture that you're talking about.
That is the picture.
That's the picture you're talking about.
Let me just tell you who's in the picture. The Black people that are standing on the far left, his name is Richard Brumfield. That is one of Liddy's oldest children. The next gentleman is Calvin Caston, her husband. The Black woman that you see standing, that is Liddy. And the last man, Black man standing, his name is Eli, and I haven't been able to totally verify this, but I think that was her nephew. Now, what is most interesting, the Caucasian man sitting with his hat on his knee, his name is Henry S. Brumfield. And he and his father were the former slave owners.
Wow.
And next to him is his sister, Laura Brumfield Andrews. And the next gentleman is, if I recall correctly, his name is Joseph Warren Brumfield. And we have sat and tried to determine there must have been a connection that he included these Black former slaves in the picture. And we also wonder, well, Richard has his hand on his shoulder. So there must have been a good connection there.
Yes,
and that picture has been so powerful in our family that we were able to make that type of connection.
Wow. Well, Nona, thank you. Nona, I live around a lot of Brumfields, and I live in Tangipahoa Whole Parish. So I'm going to want to connect with you because I live not very far, and I do know some Castons as well.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you for being a guest here today on Nurturing Our Roots. Thank you. All right. Boy, I tell you these stories, all I can tell you is that I can just sit here and listen and listen and listen because each one of them have great stories. I'm going to bring on Luana since I have the photographs up already. Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. How are
Welcome to
you?
Nurturing Our Roots. I'm excited to hear your story.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm going to tell the story of my great-great-grandfather, Verdell Wills. He had 39 and 93/100ths of an acre in and around Kennegaw, Choctaw County, Mississippi. I grew up looking at this land patent, but not really understanding it. I'd always heard about 40 acres and a mule. And so we used to laugh and say, well, gee, where's the mule? And we also looked at 39 and 93/100ths of an acre and said, they couldn't even give him the 40 acres. Well, of course, it wasn't till I talked to Bernice that I really looked at that land patent and read it and started to understand the Homesteading Act of 1862. And I can't tell you the surprises we had in looking at that in the application package. So that was wonderful because I'd been researching my family for 50 years. And for me, I grew up knowing that Verdell Wills was enslaved and that he had a homestead. And that's about all we knew about him. We knew, he had children. And so I know even today, I know some of the cousins through that line of the family, but we just didn't have information on the man or what his life must have been like. And so what's so remarkable to me is that in one generation, Verdell Wills led his family from slavery to freedom by establishing a 120-acre farm and a new way of life for generations to come. So as I talk, you'll understand more about that statement. So in the package, my first surprise was 10 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, I found out that the land patent, the 40 acres, that wasn't all he had. He actually already owned an 80-acre farm in Choctaw County, Mississippi. And so that's a picture of me in Choctaw County because I always wanted to go there. And thanks to Bernice and her book, I actually traveled to Choctaw County just to get additional information. And I did find some information in the courthouse records and also a little bit in the public library.
Was that your first time traveling there?
My first time traveling there. And that's in the courthouse. If you notice, I've got on protective clothing. One thing I've learned about ancestor hunting is you can get dirty. You don't know if you're going to be climbing through cemeteries. In this case, the library, you could tell those books hadn't been touched in 100 years. I mean, the dust that fell off of them. And as I turned the pages, the paper would crumple. So anyone who's doing it, I would advise that they get protective clothing. And that's just me going through the records, which I didn't understand land records, but they were so good about helping me understand. And I've since that time gone to research some of my ancestor homesteads in Michigan and into the courthouses. And it seems that all the records are a little different, but the people that work there are very helpful at helping you learn to go through the records and understand them. And it's just amazing the amount of information in the records. And that's me at the library, even the library staff. Everybody in the library was working for me that day. Oh. Somebody was going through microfiche, somebody was going through computers, somebody was pulling out books. And you can also see there's a map they were trying to show me where the Black cemeteries were in Choctaw County, which I never made it to the cemeteries, but I did get pretty close to a stone's throw from my great-great-grandfather's homestead. The land is no longer in the family, but I drove as close as I could. The roads didn't actually go exactly where his land was, but it went close enough. And I got out of the car, dug up some soil, and prepared some containers and sent them to my cousins and to my aunt for Christmas. And they were all
That is
very appreciative
really
of that.
That is really nice. Is that the patent in the back that I'm looking at? The original? A copy of the
That's
original?
that's the original. It was handed down to my father. And like I say, I grew up looking at it, just didn't realize what it really was. Thought it was 40 acres and a mule.
Really?
Yes. So I always knew he was enslaved, and I always knew he had these 40 acres. And through the application process is where I found out that he had the adjoining farm of 80 acres. And that was just 10 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. So in 1873, he was already on 80 acres. In Choctaw County, I looked, I could not find the information on how he got the land. The book that contained that information was missing. All the other books seem to be there. You could see there's a lot of books, but not that one.
Yeah.
But I'm told the courthouse it burned down a couple of times. So I guess I'm very fortunate that the record survived that I could find.
I have seen that over and over again, but this is just great. Now, I want to ask you this question. How did you feel when you found all of this information? And what did it do for you as a person?
So the application package arrived the day that my cousin Joanna Johnson was in town she lives in Memphis now. And I was so excited. I said, we got to get together. I know you're here to see other family members, but we got to get together. Have I got something to show you? And we sat down and we looked at that because the writing back then was a little different than it is now. And we're going over that application and trying to read it and make it out. And oh my goodness, we just had a great time. And it was just such a great source of pride. It was like winning a prize after all these years of researching. And finally, my great-great-grandfather wasn't just a name on a certificate, but he was an actual human being who had struggles in going through getting his land patent. I heard someone earlier talk about ignorant of the law. Well, that happened to my great-granddad too. But the funny thing is they said he was ignorant of the law. They said he didn't advertise in the newspaper for 6 consecutive weeks to say that he was going to make a final proof on the land. And I don't know how, but somehow the editor of the newspaper showed up in person at the courthouse with copies of the articles to say, yes, he did advertise for 6 consecutive weeks. And so that was a turning point in his application process.
Yes. And I like the fact that you walked on the ground and you thought it would be a great gift to give some of the other family members that, the soil with the land. It makes a difference. I know when I went to Niger, Africa, that's the first thing I wanted to do because I was walking on that soil that my ancestors once lived on,
Right,
and I know
right.
you're sharing this with the young people in your family and family members. Are they receiving this very well, the information that you're sharing?
They're receiving it so well that as soon as they found out about a chapter in a book, they started ordering the book.
That's amazing. Yes. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your story, and all the stories are so great, and it's going to make other people want to go out and do their own research and buy the book just to continue to read some of the stories that you're hearing here today. You can contact Bernice personally to buy books. You want that autographed book or Amazon, but she'll come back on to talk about how other people can purchase the books. If you really want to know more about these beautiful stories that's being shared here by the contributors of the book. Thank you so much for being a guest on Nurturing Our Roots.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. All right. Okay. We're going to bring on Alvin. Hi, Alvin. How are you?
Hi, Antoinette. How are you?
All right, you're back again for the third time, huh?
Back
You're
again.
getting to be a regular now. Yes. Okay, Alvin, I know you have a unique story to share with us. Let's just get into it.
Yeah, so my story is about a cousin. Um, his name is Robert Veal. Robert Veal is his grandfather was named Robert Veal, and his father was Peter Veal. And they moved into Woodville very early. It's a long story. Into Woodville, Mississippi, in Wilkerson County, in about 1809. So this Robert Veal Senior, my 3 times great grandfather, had a son Benjamin Veal, and he had a son Robert Veal Jr., who was my great grandfather. So Benjamin had a son Robert, so he's named after his grandfather Robert Veal. He applied for. He was born in 1872. He married Bessie Kane there in Woodville. He had 3 children. He applied for 81.67 acres in the area called Buffalo Creek, which is right north of the town of Woodville. He said he lived on his land for 5 years. He worked the land. He had 22 acres that he worked. He had a 2-room house, a crib, a cotton house. He farmed 22 acres and had crops on it. So he made all the requirements for the land. He applied for the land in 1898. He received his pattern for the land February 13th, 1905. He said the land was worth approximately $60. The house was worth approximately $60. So in researching him, I know all about his ancestors, our early people who came into Woodville, but mysteriously in 1910, he disappears. And then after doing research, I found out that the land was, there was a lawsuit and the land appeared to have been taken away from him. So I believe that he lost the land. So I'm still researching that story. So as some of the other speakers have said, a lot of times the land did not stay with us, but we're here to document that there was land. And so I believe there's a lesson here that even though the land is lost and there's no record that the families have of it, that does not mean that you did not have an ancestor who acquired the land. So our goal in this task of writing this book is to document the process that our ancestors went through and to find out that, yes, they met the requirements for the land. If the land was stolen, lost, or stolen, that also has to be found out. But the lesson here is, just because, for anybody out there, just because you don't see evidence of the land in your family does not mean your ancestors did not once have the land. So I'll be brief with my story and let you bring Bernice on, and that will be it for me.
You know, this has been just one powerful hour of sharing information. And I know I have a picture I want to share. Just give me 1 minute to share this one picture. Ah, there it is. I got it. So let me just see if I can sorry everybody, I have to make some room just to get that presentation up again.
Yeah.
All right, let me see. Give me 1 minute. We're working on it. All right, and then I'll bring you back, Alvin. I'm really trying to show that one beautiful picture that let's see if I can share. All the pictures are so beautiful. Okay, this is the picture that. All right, is that the picture of William? Can you unmute yourself, please? I think she's okay. All right.
Yes, that's Boss. That's my grandfather. That's the one that ruled his community.
Wow. Yeah, I just wanted to bring you on just to really and how did you get that picture before you end up for the day? How did you get that picture?
You know, my mother probably was like a lot of our parents and grandparents. She had a cedar chest where she kept all her pictures, and she told us we couldn't look at them because she didn't want them to disappear. And I went to visit her once when she was 85, and she says, "Come with me." And she takes me to her bedroom and opened up the cedar chest and just gave me all these pictures because she says, I know you're going to appreciate them and share them with everybody else. I want to give them to you. So that's how I got that picture.
Oh, well, we thank you for sharing such a very handsome man, so we can see the resemblance with you as well.
Yeah. And you can see how he was dressed.
Yes. Yes. Pride, that's something that we see in all the pictures. So we
Yeah.
want to thank you for sharing that picture with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Uh-huh. And I certainly would like to say to Alvin, thank you so much, Alvin, for sharing your story with us, because all of these stories are very important. Bernice, I know that, I can see how the Heavenly Father just used you to bring all of these great stories together. I can just listen to it, so I can see it's one thing to read the book, but then when you actually talk to the descendants, it's a different type of story. Let me see. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, I can. I have sat here and listened with the biggest smile. And I'm just so proud of these stories. We need to tell these stories. It's just amazing, talking to people and saying, Black people did own land. We did get land under the Homestead Act. And to be able to listen to all of these Mississippi descendants, I am so proud of all of you. Thank you.
And you should be. And I was getting comments about Alvin's story 3 and 4 days after he told his story and how detailed it is, and listen to each one of the contributors talk about their ancestors as if the stories just came alive tonight for me. It's amazing. It's amazing. And I know that other people will be inspired to tell their story or research the story. Just research your family history. Bernice, did you ever think that when you was researching your ancestor, Peter Clark, did you have any idea that this journey was going to take you on the places that it has taken you?
Absolutely not. I had no idea. I just knew that because he managed to get land, others had to have done the same thing. I mean, that's the only thing that I could say. He was not the only homesteader. We had to have other homesteaders. And I'm just so happy that individuals stepped up to the challenge to write and share their stories. And stories are coming online almost every day.
I saw that as well.
Yes, and they're shared all over Facebook. And I want to encourage people, just join the descendants of African American homesteaders. We have over 300 people in that group right now on Facebook. But also tell your story. Search for your land. If your ancestors don't own land, look at the person next to them.
Mm-hmm.
Look at others, because you may find that your ancestor was a witness for somebody else.
Just listening to all the stories tonight, and to know that some of that land is still in the family. And as one of the contributors said, Nona said, she's blogging. There's so much that we can do. Last week, Alvin and I talked about, the importance of blogging and sharing these stories. Everybody's writing their own narratives. We're telling our story, especially during this time when they're talking about the critical race theory. We're saying, you know what, we have ways to tell our stories, and we're research. That's the one thing that many of our ancestors who couldn't read and had to, make their mark. So here we are. We're the ones that's reading. We're the ones that can tell the stories, whether it be through books, films, blogs. Just tell the story. Just tell the story.
Absolutely. Just tell that story. Yes.
And Alvin, speaking about blogging, that is your way of sharing your story. Have you shared your ancestor story about homesteading on the blog?
I have not shared that yet.
Mhm.
that's part of a branch of the family. I have so many stories on so many branches. That's one. That's a long story. As I said when I began tonight, that's a long story about the rest of the family. Some of the family did have land. They were able to purchase land, raise cotton, and someone sold them some land. And this particular cousin, uh, some of the family had land, but he did not. So he decided to get his own land. And so, the thing that's beautiful about all of this is the more you research, the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. So, I mean, I saw years ago this patent for Robertville, and I knew he was a cousin. I'm like, well, I don't know what that means. I saw it signed by the president, and then here comes Bernice. She's saying, "Get your story in," and I kind of ignored her at first. She came in a month later, "Get the story in, do this," and so it opened up this whole thing about homesteading that still we haven't even scratched the surface of it, because
right.
for every county in Mississippi, there's going to be one of the witnesses, Henry Burns, to Robertville. He was a homesteader. So, every story, we follow the story from the beginning, the ancestors of that person, and follow what happened to that land in their life. And that's going to be a story after story all along the way. So it's another area that we have to research, because you don't know which story is going to jump off and be the spark that leads to something phenomenal. You just don't know which road you're going to go down to get there. And homesteading certainly can be one of them.
Right.
I think at this time, you all, we need to really look at, having interns as young people that can come in and help us, because I know many of us, we have been doing this for so long, and we want to continue, but we do know that we must face our own mortality and know that, there comes a time. So we certainly don't want to start and then see it stop. So we have to look at ways to keep it going. There's a young woman named Sharon Pons, who is the daughter of Eddie Pons, who's the publisher and the editor for the oldest black newspaper that covered Tangipahoa and Baton Rouge and other. She said, "This is the best history lesson, better than the books we had in school." Thanks you all so very much for commemorating the memories, the legacies, the triumphs of your ancestors, your family, and telling a story. It's like anything else, we tell it everywhere we go, you know. And so I thank the Heavenly Father for each of you, because each of you have given so much in areas. I knew nothing about Choctaw, Mississippi. Now I know. Denise and I, our ancestors come out of Amite County. I'm very familiar with that. Nona comes out of the Pike County. And then Bernice, you just met Passy, who is a Brumfield family. And there was
Right.
another Brumfield a person contact me today. So that's another connection I think that she needs to be in contact with. There was another lady contact me related to the Huff family that made me once again think about Denise again. So you see, all of us in some way, we are interconnected some kind of way through living as neighbors, families, the Villes. I know Villes right now in Amite, Louisiana.
Yes, yes. All the AMID connections, I know that we probably, Bernice, we talked a few months ago about an AMID connection. So
Yes.
I know we're all connected in
Yeah,
that way. So,
Amite, Louisiana. There's some fields right there. Stay
mhm,
right down the road from me when I was a child. And matter
mhm.
of fact, they still stay on the same land.
Yes, yes.
So and thank you all for that, because I'm gonna tell you, this coming Thursday, there's an attorney is going to be here in Kentwood, and that attorney will be talking about how to settle land. For instance, if someone passed away 10 years ago, they still haven't taken care of their business, she's going to be addressing those type of questions and making comments, and I am going to go live with it, because this is something that we need. You see, we had the land, our ancestors owned the land, had the land, but what I see now is there's less successions that's being opened, less family meetings and discussions to talk about the heir property. I have 20 acres in my family, been in my family since 1896. And just getting the family to come together to make sure that we hold on to that land. I was in they they recognized the black farmers last Monday, and the Commissioner of Agriculture said one thing. He said, "My daddy told me, don't ever sell that land, boy." And that's just how he said it to him. He called him boy. He really didn't have a name. Everything was boy, boy, in the rural community. But the point was, his father said to him, "They are not making any more land. So hold on to that land." So what we need to teach the young people is how to hold on to the land. When we go to family reunions, if there's any unsettled issues with the land, that needs to be on the agenda for those that want to come to that family business meeting to address the land, to understand what the legal description is, whose name is in the land, the land is in, is the taxes paid, is it homestead exempt? Those need to be the type of business discussions at family reunions if we're going to pass anything on to the younger people.
That's right. I mean, generational wealth is something that we should all be aware of and aspire to make certain that if there is land in the family, that we're keeping it in the family.
That we
do have to make sure that from a legal perspective, we're taking care of business.
Exactly. I know a family right now, the Muse brothers. They have 100 acres of land, and they walk the land markers down. They go into the courthouse to make sure that the records have not been removed or anything. And see, that's a part of it too. So I really feel that, as we evolve into understanding the importance of, yes, we owned it, but now let's see what we can do in this day and time to maintain it. Now, let me point out this. In 1900, according to a study, we owned 15.9 million acres of land as Black people in 1900. Today, we're down to less than 2 million acres of land. The first thing that some family members say before they can get Big Mama or Papa in the grave or whoever, let's sell. I want to sell. I want to sell. We all know. We all know.
So my grandmother had a little black book, one of these little 2x2 books you buy in a 5 and dime store. And what she had I wrote a story about Mama Beulah's she was a veal, little black book. She had a note in there that said, "The land is not for sale."
You see?
But we have some obstacles. I mean, we have to have family unity to resolve some of these issues, and we a lot of times don't have it, and that's what we got to work on.
That's
right.
Yeah, that's right. And we have to document, though. We have to tell the story. We have to at least make certain that our family members are aware of the fact that we were successful in acquiring land, and make land part of our genealogy toolkit to find out what's happening. We can go through the census and have a good old time saying who begat whom, but let's also look at what happened in the in-between years and what did they do. They did a lot of stuff, but if we don't ever talk about the land, it's like it didn't exist. So now let's bring it forth and share what we can about that land. And if it means every single individual that has just shared their stories write their own books, which would be absolutely fantastic, at least that's part of your history that you're passing on, because you are in the history book with the Black homesteaders of the South, but you also have an opportunity to just keep on writing and keep on sharing those stories.
And I just again want to say thank you. And before we close, we have 10 minutes. I would like for each person, as I call you, to give us a closing statement. We're going to start with Noma. Can you hear me?
Oh, you're saying Norma? No.
Yes.
My cousin Henrietta always, when we talked, said, "Thank God and be appreciative of family, because that's all you got you can rely on." And that's what I remember when I wrote my stories, thinking about family and thinking how they, as part of our history in terms of looking to the future, family sharing the stories, Family sharing the story. So pass your story on to your family, or they can pass their story on to theirs. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you. Denise?
Well, I do have my nephew who called me one day and wanted to know if he could be the next family historian. So he has my entire database, and he's doing a wonderful job, just a wonderful job. And he's thinking about writing as well. And I'm just excited. And I want to let Nona know that I have Caston relatives too. My grandmother was a Caston. So, but yes, I love it. I love it. I don't have children by choice, but every last member of my family, they know who they are to their second and third great grandparents. And I don't mind sharing pictures. I don't mind sharing stories. I have ancestors in Ireland, Canada, Australia, Ireland, and we talk. And different ones, even in the United States, they say, you know more about our family than I do. Even some of the white ones, they'll say, I didn't know that about our family. I didn't know we were related to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I've made friends all over the internet. And if they ask me not to say who's talking, I don't. So it was something we have to do because we're not being taught, or we're never taught the correct things about our ancestors. And so it's something we have to do. I don't even care if the book gets banned. Everybody will read it then.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. All right. Let's go to Nona. A
You
closing
know,
statement from you.
I really am glad to have this opportunity. My nuclear family was very small, and I used to tell everyone I'm really from a small family. But
Mhm.
doing genealogy research, I have found that I'm actually from a large family. I have so many cousins that I have been able to meet, and through genealogy research, through doing the research that was related to the Bureau of Land Management patents, I have found relatives all over, and I really appreciate being able to do this type of work. I have now become the self elected family historian,
That's
and,
amazing.
and I would just like to encourage everybody to keep on keeping on.
Mhm. We owe it to them. We owe it. And to ourselves. Thank you so much, Nona. Thank you for being a guest on Nurturing Our Roots as well. Mhm. All right. Johnny.
Yes. I've been researching nearly 30 years now, and there's nobody else in my family that's as passionate as I am about, family history and researching. And so I wondered, okay, what's going to happen to all my stuff, all the information that I have?
Mhm.
And so now at this point, what I'm doing is I'm trying to document everything. Another reason why I wanted to participate in, Bernice's book and everything. I have written a book on my mother's side of the family, 3 generations coming out of slavery. I'm writing a book right now about my husband and a situation that went on with him. And I have joined lineage organizations. And I've also written articles for genealogy publications. So I'm just trying to do everything I can to get that history out there. So when someone does get interested, they're not going to have the problem that I have. Information is going to be everywhere for them to find out about the family.
Well, thank you for being a guest here on Nurturing Our Roots. And it has been a pleasure listening to everyone's story. And thank you, and keep telling your story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. All right, Alvin. A
Yes.
closing statement for us.
Yeah, I'd like to one more time thank Bernice because, again, this started with an idea she had about what is behind. I'm going to open this door and see what's behind that door. Being persistent enough to call everybody multiple times, to email us, to start a website. So there are a lot of people out there with ideas, but not everyone can stick with it. Pull all your resources together, pull all your ideas together like Bernice did, and make it into a book like this, which this book contains so many lessons. There's going to be so many lessons for so many people. And I mean, it's going to be really a really, really big story. This is a chapter that needs to be inserted in the history books. It is a chapter that will be inserted. And as I said last week, Antoinette, we're not rewriting history. We are writing history.
We're writing history. I like that. And
Mhm.
thank you, Alvin, for once again being a guest on Nurturing Our Roots. Well, Bernice, it's so exciting just to see the labor of love. And, I feel tonight was almost like this segment, it was a safe place for us to come and share stories and to honor our ancestors. But I do want everyone that's listening by way of YouTube or Facebook, remember, March the 1st. If you are a Black person, your history will be there tomorrow as well. Because the one thing I can assure you, there's no way that we can squeeze or condense all the 400 or 500 years, 550 years into 28 days. It's just too much. So we will extend it tomorrow and we'll move forward as we celebrate Women History Month and honor those strong women in our families. I believe that history starts local. It starts with you. It starts with myself. It starts with everyone's history. And when you start to research your own family history, it's going to open up so much for you. When Bernice started researching her family history, she had no idea it was going to take her the way it took her, though on the roads that it took her. Neither did I. We did it because we owe it to our ancestors, we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our children, we owe it to those yet unborn, and we owe it to the world's history because it is our history. And so, Bernice, in closing, what would you like to tell us?
Your stories matter. It's so important to understand that you have a beautiful history and you need to tell those stories, write those stories, and make certain that you're passing those stories on to generations that you may not even realize will pick those stories up and tell those stories. So I just want to just thank you, Dr. Antoinette Harrell. We have known each other for a long time.
Long
I have
time.
just admired all of your work and your dedication to genealogy and telling the story. And thank you for having us tonight.
And thank each of you all. Just amazing stories. Now, when I go back and read the book again, it's going to have a different light because I'm going to say, "Oh, I know I met this person. I heard about their ancestors." So when I read it, and that's the one thing about a book, you can go back and read that book over and over, and there's going to be a different twist each time, but this time I can say I saw the photographs. I heard the descendants of this person speak. So once again, thank you, Bernice, for being a guest. And as always, to all the contributors, such great stories. Just keep telling it everywhere you go. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.